In the annals of American history, the colony of Georgia stands out for its unique origins. Founded in 1732, Georgia was not conceived as a haven for religious freedom or a land of boundless opportunity, but as a debtor's colony. It was meant to offer a fresh start for those burdened by debt in England, a chance to rebuild their lives across the Atlantic. This experiment in social reform was the brainchild of James Oglethorpe, a British philanthropist and member of Parliament. Oglethorpe envisioned Georgia as a place where debtors, released from the overcrowded prisons of England, could find redemption through hard work and honest living. He believed that this new colony would not only provide relief to the indebted, but would also serve as a buffer zone between the prosperous colony of South Carolina and the Spanish settlements in Florida. Georgia, with its population of former debtors, would act as a line of defense against potential Spanish aggression. This vision, however, was not without its flaws. The reality of life in early Georgia proved to be far harsher than Oglethorpe had imagined, and the colony's dependence on debt would have a lasting impact on its social and economic development. In 18th century England, debt was a heavy burden, often leading to imprisonment in squalid and overcrowded jails. Debtors' prisons were notorious for their inhumane conditions, with disease and starvation commonplace. James Oglethorpe, appalled by the plight of these unfortunate souls, saw an opportunity in the New World. He envisioned Georgia as a place where debtors could escape the clutches of poverty and imprisonment. Released from the confines of their cells, they would be given land and the tools to work it, allowing them to pay off their debts and build new lives for themselves. Oglethorpe's plan appealed to both humanitarians who saw it as a merciful alternative to imprisonment, and to mercantilists who viewed it as a way to populate the colonies with industrious workers. The Crown granted a charter for the colony in 1732, and soon, ships carrying hopeful debtors set sail for the shores of Georgia. This grand experiment in social reform, however, was built on a foundation of naive optimism. The reality of life in colonial Georgia would soon prove to be far different from the idyllic vision that Oglethorpe had painted. The reality that greeted the first settlers in Georgia was harsh. The land was unfamiliar and unforgiving, the climate hot and humid. The promised support from the trustees, often slow in arriving, did little to alleviate their hardships. Many of the settlers, unfamiliar with the demands of agriculture, struggled to cultivate the land and produce successful harvests. The strict regulations imposed by the trustees further fueled discontent among the colonists. Oglethorpe and the trustees, in an attempt to create a utopian society, had outlawed slavery and restricted land ownership. They believed that these measures would prevent the rise of a wealthy elite and ensure a more equitable distribution of wealth. However, these well-intentioned policies ultimately backfired. The ban on slavery, while morally commendable, put Georgia at a disadvantage compared to its neighbors who relied heavily on slave labor. The limitations on land ownership stifled economic growth and prevented settlers from acquiring the wealth they desired. These restrictions, coupled with the difficult living conditions, led to growing unrest and disillusionment among the colonists. The dream of a debtor's haven, a land of opportunity and second chances, began to fade in the face of these challenges. While Georgia was founded with the noble intention of offering debtors a fresh start, the system of indentured servitude, often used to bring settlers to the colony, became a double-edged sword. It provided much-needed labor but also perpetuated a cycle of poverty that hindered economic growth. Indentured servants, bound by contract to work for a certain number of years to pay off their passage, found themselves trapped in a system that offered little chance for advancement. The terms of their servitude were often harsh, and the work, primarily agricultural, was physically demanding. This system, while different from chattel slavery, created a rigid social hierarchy that stifled economic mobility. Indentured servants, upon completing their terms, often found themselves with little or no land or resources, forcing them to eke out a living on the margins of colonial society. The reliance on indentured servitude, while initially intended to alleviate the plight of debtors, ultimately contributed to a cycle of poverty that limited economic opportunity and hindered the development of a more prosperous and equitable society in early Georgia. Section 5. Shifting Sands of Power, from Debtor's Colony to Plantation State. As the decades passed, the original vision of Georgia as a debtor's haven faded, and the colony underwent a dramatic transformation. The restrictions on slavery and land ownership, once seen as cornerstones of Oglethorpe's plan, were gradually eroded under pressure from colonists seeking greater economic opportunity. The introduction of large-scale agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice and indigo, fueled the demand for labor, and the ban on slavery was eventually lifted in 1751. This marked a turning point in Georgia's history, setting it on a path towards becoming a plantation-based economy dependent on enslaved African labor. The influx of wealthy planters and the growth of the slave trade brought about a dramatic shift in power. The original settlers, many of whom had come to Georgia seeking relief from debt, found themselves increasingly marginalized in a society dominated by a wealthy planter elite. The legacy of Georgia's founding as a debtor's colony, while overshadowed by its later development as a slaveholding state, continued to resonate in the social and economic structures of the colony. The cycle of poverty and limited opportunity, once associated with indentured servitude, found new expression in the brutal realities of chattel slavery. Section 6. The Shadow of Imprisonment, Mass Incarceration, and Echoes of the Past. The specter of Georgia's past as a debtor's colony continues to haunt its present, manifesting in the state's staggering rates of incarceration and the deep-seated social and economic disparities that persist to this day. While the circumstances may have changed, the underlying themes of poverty, punishment, and limited opportunity echo across the centuries. Georgia, with one of the highest incarceration rates in the United States, has earned the dubious distinction of being a prison state. Its sprawling prison-industrial complex, housing tens of thousands of inmates, stands as a stark reminder of the state's historical reliance on forced labor and social control. The overrepresentation of African Americans within the criminal justice system, a legacy of centuries of systemic racism and oppression, further underscores the enduring impact of Georgia's past. The echoes of slavery, Jim Crow, and the mass criminalization of black and brown bodies resonate within the walls of these modern-day prisons. The legacy of Georgia's founding as a penal colony, while not directly responsible for these modern-day injustices, provides a historical lens through which to understand the deep-seated roots of inequality and the enduring challenges facing the state. Section 7. Beyond the Bar's Social and Economic Disparities in Modern Georgia. The shadow of Georgia's carceral past extends far beyond the prison walls, casting a long shadow over the lives of countless citizens who find themselves ensnared in a web of poverty, limited opportunity, and social exclusion. The state's history as a debtor's colony, founded on the exploitation of those in debt, resonates in the present-day struggles of communities grappling with economic hardship and social marginalization. Generational poverty, a persistent problem in many parts of Georgia, traps families in a cycle of disadvantage, limiting their access to quality education, healthcare, and economic opportunity. The lack of investment in social safety nets and programs designed to break the cycle of poverty further exacerbates these challenges. The racial wealth gap, a stark reminder of the legacy of slavery and segregation, continues to plague Georgia, with Black and Hispanic communities disproportionately affected by poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to resources. This economic inequality fuels social unrest, health disparities, and a sense of hopelessness among those left behind. Addressing these systemic issues requires a reckoning with Georgia's past and a commitment to building a more just and equitable future for all its citizens. Section 8. Breaking the Cycle. Confronting the Legacy of a Penal Past. Confronting Georgia's penal past requires more than acknowledgement. It demands policy shifts. Breaking the cycle of poverty and incarceration needs a multi-pronged approach. Investing in education and addressing systemic racism are crucial. Georgia must promote fairness, rehabilitation, and economic opportunities. By embracing equity, Georgia can heal and build a brighter future. Section 9. A legacy redefined towards a more just and equitable future for Georgia. Georgia's journey from a penal colony to a modern state is a testament to resilience and progress. By acknowledging its history and embracing justice, Georgia can forge a new path. It requires collective effort to build an inclusive society. Georgia's story is still being written, a story of progress and opportunity.